I'd like to introduce Miles Sarrill, who you just heard speaking. He's a former student, graduated in 2008 from our program, went on to UMass Amherst, and then went to McGill to do his master's. He's a national educator for CV Sciences, which is the company that he will talk about in his lecture. And he also did a lot of research when he was he's a published scientist with research background in molecular toxicology. And I'm going to turn it over to him right now. It's his lecture. If you have questions, I'm sure he'll direct it from here. So Miles, with that, I'm just going to ask people to mute unless they have a question.
Yes, and as I said, please interrupt me. I love the idea of the virtual hand raise because I want us to make sure that we're all on the same page here. Thank you for the warm introduction, Mr. Rafter. Mr. Rafter was actually a teacher of mine back in 2007 and 2008. So I really value quite a lot the education that I received at Minuteman, especially in the biotechnology program. And it really set me up for, I think, a lot of success in college and in grad school because I knew stuff that people were just starting to learn in college and later on. I met master's students who have never touched mammalian cell culture before while I was doing that back in junior year of high school. So I really wanted to give back in some way to my biotech Minuteman community by offering this lecture for you all. It's a topic that I'm really fascinated by. It's not just because it's mystique, it's cannabis or whatever. We have this endogenous system that seems to control a lot of normal human function, and people aren't talking about it very much. Hence the title, The Forgotten Neurotransmitters. Well, let's try to remember them now, okay? So as I said, interrupt me. If you don't want to interrupt me verbally, maybe type something into the chat. I'm not going to be watching the chat, but maybe Mr. Rafter will, and he can speak up too. We'll figure some type of system out. But I just want to get started right now. So first of all, you can all see my screen, yes? Thumbs up. I'm going to assume that
your screen is up there, Miles. You're good.
Super. Okay. The immune system helps to protect us against internal threats that include viruses, fungi, bacteria, etc. And then on the other side of that is the stress system. And what I mean by that especially are all of the hormones involved in the fight or flight response, okay? That we evolved the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis, the HPA axis, to help protect the body against external threats, such that imagine yourself as 10,000 years ago, you're a hunter-gatherer, you're picking berries, and a big cat attacks you. You have the fight or flight response to help you run away from whatever is attacking you in that moment. The problem is that in the modern 21st century, the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis, the stress response, gets overactivated by paper tigers, that keeping the news on 24/7, that being glued to the screen can really disrupt that stress response. And that in turn can actually impact the immune response. And I'll remind you that inflammation is a crucial function of the immune system, and that excess stress can throw the immune system out of balance, leading to inflammation. So I don't know if this is something that you've studied very much extensively already, but I just wanted to go over the HPA axis real quick since we are talking about it. Basically, there are parts in your brain that sense fear, especially the so-called reptilian part of the brain, the ancient evolutionary midbrain that you find in, they call it reptilian because reptiles don't really have a lot of the forebrain where critical thinking happens. They have this sort of reactive, fear-centered part of the brain that says, I want food, or I want to run away, or I'm going to freeze and pretend to be dead or whatever. And that includes the hypothalamus. That includes the amygdala. So your eyes sense fear, or you hear something that induces fear. The amygdala sends signals to the hypothalamus, and then the hypothalamus sends a hormone to the pituitary. Pituitary sends a hormone to the adrenals. Adrenals release cortisol, which is one of the major stress hormones. And cortisol is, it's not all bad, but excess cortisol is involved with weight gain because cortisol is there to kind of help you pack on some basically fleshy armor around your soft parts to protect you from getting stabbed or attacked by a cat or whatever. Cortisol is involved with helping us wake up in the morning, though. But people that are under stress conditions all of the time, that cortisol response gets disrupted. Cortisol not rising in the morning and rising later on in the day contributes to people being having insomnia, having fatigue because they can't wake up in the morning. So this system needs to be tightly regulated. And basically, again, as I said this before, we did not evolve to be under fear conditions 24/7. We evolved such that a stressful situation might arise in an instant, and then it goes away, and then your system returns to normal. But if we're being bombarded by crazy news or footage on our cell phones or whatever, you know, the electric bill in the mail, that induces the stress response. And that can be really damaging for the immune system. What do I mean by that? Just read the sentence with me. Stress hormones shut down the immune system so that you can run for your life. Part of the proof right here, if any of you have ever used hydrocortisone cream for your rashes, well, what's a rash? Oftentimes it's an excess immune response. It's inflammation. Hydrocortisone is more or less the same as cortisol that your adrenals are releasing when you're in fear. Okay, so they took our own stress hormone and turned it into a pharmaceutical for the sake of controlling the immune system. Now, here's the problem. Under a normal stress response, your brain releases, you know, the HPA axis activation, cortisol is released, cortisol blocks inflammation. The reason why it is that both the immune system and the stress response require a lot of energy. And when you need to run away from a tiger, your body evolved this response to say, let's shut down everything else. I do not need to rest and digest. I don't need to fight against viruses. I just need to run the heck away. The feelings of butterflies in your stomach are the blood vessels tightening up. Let's push blood out from the stomach and into my arms and legs so I can fight or flight. So cortisol blocks inflammation. Now, let's say you're chronically bombarded by stress. Over day in and day out, day in and day out, cortisol is hitting the immune cells. The immune cells are going to stop listening. They're like, hey, wait a minute. You're crying wolf here. What's going on? Immune cells eventually become resistant to cortisol. And that can trigger excess inflammation in and of itself. If they're resistant to the signal that says stop producing immune response, then that means the immune system can become overactivated. So I want to show you this peer-reviewed article over here. Take a look at this. Associations with cortisol levels and with inflammatory markers. In this article, they write, socioeconomic and psychosocial factors have been found to be associated with systemic inflammation. And that higher levels of the inflammatory marker, IL-6, I don't know if you've been taught about cytokines or interleukins yet, but interleukin-6 is a highly inflammatory immune signaling molecule. And it's actually found involved with COVID, with the cytokine storms that worsen symptoms in COVID-19. Higher levels of IL-6 were associated with higher cortisol throughout the day. The more stressed you are, day in and day out, the higher your inflammatory load, and the less your immune system is going to be able to function properly. Now, inflammation is not all good nor bad. We need some inflammation. There's some inflammation on the left-hand side over here. That's the Nietzsche. That's the what doesn't kill us makes us stronger part of inflammation. That's when you exercise and then you feel achy after inflammation, that you're feeling, you know, you're building up strength. Or if you're rolling around in the mud growing up, you're growing up on a farm, don't they say, I don't know if you've heard about this, that kids have stronger immune systems if you're rolling around in dirt, less allergies? All of this kind of low is transient stress, transient inflammation builds tolerance. It builds homeostasis. It builds balance within the immune system. But that when the immune system is not able to resolve its inflammation, And maybe that's because of the fact that people get stressed out all the time, and because cortisol becomes resistant, then that can lead to chronic inflammation. And chronic inflammation is basically involved with every disease of aging that Western medicine does not have a good answer for. Autoimmune diseases, MS, but even depression, even fatigue, low-grade inflammation. What do I mean by that? Low levels of chronic inflammation because the immune cells aren't working optimally can contribute to cognitive impairment, brain fog. If you're not eating well, if you're eating high sugar foods, that can trigger low-grade inflammation. Please eat your veggies. You'll do better on your tests, not just because it helps to tame inflammation in some ways. Okay? So that's part of the relationship between the immune system and the HPA axis. They're both very energy intensive. When we talk about energy, in some ways we're talking about ATP, cellular energy. The immune system requires a ton of ATP to fight off against viruses. If you've ever been sick with a cold and you were stuck in bed, you have felt this. You have felt your immune system holding up or requiring all of that ATP to mount an effective immune response. Well, running the heck away from tigers also requires a lot of energy. So if you're stressed out all the time, then this can rob the immune system of the required energy it needs to fight off against viruses or bacteria or other types of infections. Okay? So it turns out that the body actually needs a third system in order to mediate the needs of both the immune system and the stress system. Okay? The third system is going to have a number of different features. It's going to be ubiquitous. It's going to be found all across the body. And it's going to be having to be involved with energy intake. Maybe that involves hunger. It's going to be involved with managing stress. It's going to be involved with managing inflammation and immune activity. There has to be a third system to make sure that the immune system doesn't go out of balance and the stress system doesn't go out of balance. And that is the topic of today, the endocannabinoid system. Okay, so that endocannabinoid, we're going to describe why it is that it's called that. We're going to go over a little bit of history. But I want to start by introducing the endocannabinoid system with the voice of Dr. Vincenzo Di Marzo. And it was in 1998, and that's how recent the discovery of this system really is. In 1998, Dr. Vincenzo Di Marzo wrote that the endocannabinoid system helps our body relax, eat, sleep, protect in terms of cellular protection, and forget. Forget, that's kind of a weird one. It helps, it's involved with forgetting. You would go crazy. Your brain would explode if you remembered every single face you saw walking down the street. Okay? It helps you forget things healthfully. It's involved with the balance of memory. Relax, eat. Okay, eat. This is interesting. You're going to need to have a balanced hunger response to take in enough energy in order to feed either the immune system or the stress system. Now, I said we're going to be talking about cannabis a little bit. If you, one of the reported effects of overconsumption of medicinal or recreational cannabis, taking in too much THC, is the munchies. And in fact, it overactivates the endocannabinoid system. Okay. So I had the pleasure of meeting Dr. Vincenzo Di Marzo in last summer. Now, this is a little bit more of a fun thing. He was a little bit weirded out as to why I was treating him like a celebrity, but I grabbed my selfie with him and he signed my copy of the book, The Endocannabinoidome. But he's really done so much to help us understand some of the ins and outs of the system. And some of his latest research is actually focusing on the gut. So one of you had a question about gastrointestinal related spasticity. And he's very interested in how the microbiome, our colony of 100 trillion bacteria that live in our colon, might speak directly to our brain via this endocannabinoid system. The endocannabinoid system is found all over the place. It's in every tissue, which means that researchers at the National Institutes of Health are now writing that modulating endocannabinoid system activity holds promise for a broad range of diseases, including neurodegenerative diseases such as Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, cardiovascular diseases, inflammatory disorders, obesity, metabolic syndrome, right? This is important. If endocannabinoid system is involved with the hunger response and taking in food, that may be, if the system is activated too much by whatever reason, genetics, epigenetics, then maybe that contributes to obesity or metabolic syndrome or diabetes in some way. Chemotherapy-induced nausea and vomiting. There is a drug based on THC called dronabinol that is prescribed for this purpose. Tissue injury and pain. A lot of people choose to go to medicinal dispensaries to receive cannabis products to help treat their pain, among others. So this is the direction that scientists are now starting to look at in the present century based on some of these latest findings. And I want to share with you a news article that came out last year. I think is utterly fascinating. I can send this to you if you want to read this. Scientists find genetic mutation that makes a woman feel no pain. What's going on here? Okay, I'm going to tell you the story. Jo Cameron, she's 71 years old, does not feel pain, is described as being happy-go-lucky, has never felt fear in her whole life, has never had a fight or flight response. What's going on with her? She has a mutation in a critical part of her endocannabinoid system, which basically makes her high on life all the time. And when they do blood analysis and genetic analysis, she has highly elevated levels of some of the endocannabinoids that we're going to be talking about. They actually, the scientists that, or the doctors that discovered her, she went in for surgery for osteoarthritis. Now, she did not feel the pain from the osteoarthritis, but she still had some stiffness in her knuckles. And then after the surgery, she didn't require any medications to recover from the feeling of, the pain. She just wasn't in pain. And at this point, doctors are like, okay, this is really weird. And they studied her a bunch and they found out that there was some aspect of her endocannabinoid system that was really off that makes her just not feel pain at all. Okay, so let us now define exactly what we're talking about with the endocannabinoid system from a molecular level. So this is a little bit of a complex graph, but I'm going to break it down for you. The endocannabinoid system is a three-legged stool that relies upon the transmitters, the ligands. We're going to talk a lot about those. These are our own endogenous cannabinoids. We make them ourselves, and they're built by enzymes, and they can also be taken down by enzymes. All neurotransmitter systems, like serotonin, for example, have a way that our body can synthesize serotonin, and then we have a transporter that takes away the serotonin and breaks it down. And then there's, so same deal with endocannabinoids. And then there are receptors for endocannabinoids that we produce, and these receptors are found present almost in every tissue in the body. They're very present in the brain, but you also find them in the immune cells, you find them in the gut, you find them in the skin. They're all over the place, okay? And specifically, there's the cannabinoid binding 1 receptor and the cannabinoid binding 2 receptor. The CB1 receptors are found mostly in the brain, although they are found all over the place. And then the CB2 receptors are a little bit more confined to cells of myeloid lineage. And what I mean by that are immune cells. So you find the CB2 receptors on cells that, like neutrophils, macrophages, T cells, B cells, that kind of thing, okay? So now if you have these 2 receptors over here in the brain and in the immune system, well, we're starting to hash out a little bit of a connection between those 2. That you can have the same activator, same ligand, same transmitter bind to either receptor, can be involved with a number of different functions in normalizing stress and immunity. I did mention we're going to be talking about cannabis a little bit. Phytocannabinoids are what have a lot of people's attention right now. So again, phyto as in plant, cannabinoid. CBD is the major non-psychotoxic constituent of cannabis. You find it in agricultural hemp. CBD does not get you high. I can explain why in a little bit. THC does get you high, and it kind of binds to the same receptors that our endogenous cannabinoids do. Endogenous, so we make it ourselves, endocannabinoids. Take a look at the bottom here. These endocannabinoids that our body produces biochemically look nothing like the plant cannabinoids that you might receive from cannabis. It's a huge coincidence of nature that THC binds the same receptor as anandamide. Okay, so what's anandamide? And by the way, am I going too fast for anyone? I could pause for a moment and just check in and see if anybody has any questions.
Actually,
Go ahead.
yeah, it's me again. A while back, I was wondering, when you were talking about the immune system and like the stress, fight response, their relationship where the more stressed you are, the less energy your body's going to give to the immune system, and the less stressed you are, the more energy is going to go to your immune system.
Right.
Yeah, I was wondering how that response would come into play with certain things like parasites, for instance.
Mm.
I would be pretty stressed if I had a worm in my leg,
Right.
But then my immune system, sorry, continue?
No. That's a really good question. And the thing that's really interesting is that, so generally the stress hormones have the ability to shut down a lot of aspects of immune activity. But the way that our immune system mounts a response against parasites is a different response than what it would use against bacteria or funguses. Sorry, or viruses. So there's different axes of the adaptive immune response. I don't know if you've gotten into Th1 versus Th2 immunity. It gets pretty complicated. But yeah, absolutely. It's definitely, it can feed itself, right? Where if people that are sick with like an autoimmune issue get really stressed out about it, especially if they don't have the right type of health insurance, or they're not able to afford treatment or something, there's a number of different issues that can impact how our bodies respond. And I don't mean to get political here, but people that live in Europe, for example, right? Oftentimes their nutrition quality is better. They're able to afford better nutrition. Their healthcare quality is better, and they don't have to worry or stress out as much about the quality of their care. And they have, by and large, France has one of the best life expectancies in the whole world. And there could be a number of reasons for that, but I do think it has to do with their healthcare, and maybe that has some impact on the stress response as it feeds inflammation, as it impacts the immune system too. Does that sort of answer your question?
Yeah, thanks.
So
that was very interesting.
Yeah.
Miles, I just wanted to
also.
interrupt you for a second.
Yeah.
Sorry, this is Mr. Rafter. Folks, if you have questions as we go along, I am monitoring chat. You can type a question into chat, and I will interrupt at the right point and interject that question too, if you like.
Okay, just prior to that, I have a question for you, Miles.
Yeah.
You mentioned serotonin, and the reptilian brain, as I understand it, has a multitude of serotonergic pathways. It's interesting that the cannabidiol pathways are actually, or the endocannabinoid pathways are similar. Do you know if there's an interaction between those neurons or neuronal systems?
Oh, it's so cool. Yes, there absolutely is. There is interaction between them. You do find, I'm actually going to explain that interaction in a little bit, but just to give you a hint of it, cannabinoid receptors actually form heterodimers with a lot of other receptor types, including serotonin. It's a really widespread system that impacts a lot of neural pathways. And by the way, serotonin's kind of cool because it's not just in the brain, right? 90% of, at least in terms of humans, 90% of our body's serotonin is formed in our gut nervous system.
And where the name comes from is tonicity of blood vessels.
Yeah, right. So I think we've sort of pigeonholed serotonin into this happy hormone, and it's so much more involved with that. It's involved with platelets and immune function and digestion, kind of like how these cannabinoids, we think, oh, cannabis, you get high. No, it's involved with all these different pathways, including mediating the needs of stress and immunity. and kind of balancing the function of either stress or immunity, and by affecting inflammation, by affecting serotonin, by affecting cortisol release.
Miles, I have a quick question for you. This is Mr. Crafter.
Sure.
So I know I've been reading a lot of lately about communication between gut bacteria and the mitochondria in our cells, etc.
Yes.
Are these systems involved? Does anybody doing research on those systems, and is this related?
So there are cannabinoid receptors, not just on the outer cell membrane, but you also find cannabinoid receptors on the mitochondria of cells themselves, and they can control the cellular energy production. And certain bacteria create precursors, molecules that resemble cannabinoids.
That's interesting. Thanks.
Yeah, no, it's super interesting, which is one reason I'm so passionate about this. So, okay, thank you for all your questions. I want to bring us back to the presentation. And please keep interrupting me, but I just want to pause for a moment and make sure we're all on the same page. Anandamide. What is this? So this is this chemical on the left-hand side over here. Anandamide is one of our endogenous cannabinoids. Your body synthesizes these cannabinoids from the fats that are found in the plasma membrane of neurons or immune cells, or really many cell types. So both anandamide on the left and this other endocannabinoid here, 2-arachidinyl-glycerol, 2-AG for short, on the right, they're derived from omega-6 highly unsaturated fatty acids, which is one of, especially arachidonic acid, is one of the most predominant dietary fats that when you consume nuts, you consume red meat, whatever, this omega-6 fat gets incorporated into your cell membranes, and then your cell membranes use that as the fuel to make these cannabinoids, like this one over here called anandamide, which we're going to talk a little bit more about. Now, in order to understand anandamide, I do want to take you on some history, and we're actually going to go back about 130, 140 years ago. In the late 1800s, cannabis extracts were widely used in America. You would use, look, I love this image over here. Baby's digestive tonic for feeding based on weed, cannabis indica extract, or what's this? There's a cannabis americana extract. As active as Indian cannabis. We don't need to import it from India anymore. We can grow it ourselves. So it was widely part of the American pharmacopoeia, 1800s, late 1800s, early 1900s. And then in 1937, there was sort of a wave of reefer madness, if you will, and they passed what was called the Marijuana Tax Act of 1937, which really started to demonize the plant. And I just want to add, the plant has many cousins. There are different subspecies of cannabis. There's the drug type plants that have THC that get you high and have some medicinal effects. And then there's also agricultural hemp, like real food fiber hemp over here. There's tall stalks that have in this sort of grainy photo. The fiber from those plants would be used in rope. They'd be used to make clothes. They're really important in Europe, and they're still grown, in the United States after the passage of the 37 Tax Act. They kind of stopped growing it. But in Europe, they've been growing it kind of continuously for the last 1,000 years or so. That being said, the government had some mixed messages, and they actually produced a documentary in 1942, Grow Hemp for World War II. We need this to defeat our enemies by, incorporating the hemp into rope and put that on the vessels in the Pacific Ocean. So, as an agricultural commodity, cannabis has a really important place. But unfortunately, Marijuana Tax Act of 1937, together with the signage of the Controlled Substances Act in 1970, really limited both farmers' use to grow the agricultural hemp commodity and also limited scientists to study the plant. So now United States doesn't have very good access at all in studying cannabis. And National Institutes of Health actually funded researchers in other countries. They said, well, we can't study this here, but we want you in Israel to study this instead. So I'm going to introduce to you now Dr. Raphael Meshulam. he elucidated the chemical structures of CBD and THC in 1963 and 1964. Now, he has no interest in cannabis personally. He is just an organic chemist at the time, and he gets a funding grant from the US government. Hey, can you research pot for us? And he says, yeah, okay, sure, why not? And he discovered all of this stuff. And he was really involved with the efforts to actually figure out that THC is the major constituent of cannabis that does get people high and has all these euphoric effects, munchie-inducing effects, etc. And people did not know why THC had these effects. For years, for about 20 years, longer than 25 years, they had no clue how THC worked in the body. And THC has a really fatty sort of, it's very fat loving, it's lipophilic. So they were thinking, well, maybe THC is disrupting the plasma lemma, the plasma membrane, and that's affecting other receptors, and that's why it gets people high. And it wasn't until 1988, Dr. Alin Howlett discovered cannabinoid receptors. And she is based out of the United States, actually. So she had received a probe from Pfizer, which started to get interested in studying cannabinoids. And she used the probe and looked at rat brains and found out that in the brain, it just lit up. And she was like, wait, is this an experimental flaw? Like, did my experiment go wrong? But it lit up so brightly because it turned out there were receptors for cannabinoids everywhere in the brain. And it really surprised her. So this discovery in 1988 that we have so many cannabinoid receptors in the brain went back to Dr. Meshulam. And Dr. Meshulam, now, he's still alive. He's still researching, by the way. But back in 1992, he said, well, wait a minute. We would not evolve receptors for plant molecules, right? We would need to have our own endogenous transmitters to plug into the receptor. So he called it anandamide, called it this compound over here when he discovered it, this fatty acid compound. And one of the reasons why it took so long to discover is that these cannabinoids they function in seconds. They're really hard to discover. You find them in picomolar amounts, incredibly tiny amounts in the body. So they're kind of secretive, they're elusive. They last for seconds and minutes. They're not hormones. They're released in a very controlled and small manner in terms of time and in terms of space. Now, why did he call it anandamide? Has anybody heard what the word ananda is? And if anybody has, feel free to shout it out. But ananda is the Sanskrit word, ancient Hindi word for bliss and joy. So he had a mystic, Meshulam had a mystic in his lab, was a scientist, but I guess a meditator also, and thought, hey, this is our body's own cannabinoid. We should name it after the kind of a religious term. Let's call it after joy in Sanskrit.
Miles, there's also an ashram in upstate New York called Ananda.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so it's a word that's used in kind of the yoga communities a lot and other communities. But so they wanted to name it. They thought, well, if THC causes people bliss, maybe our body's own endogenous version is involved with the bliss response. So that's why they named it anandamide. So serotonin. Let's take this type of graph should be familiar to all of you. You've gone over synapses in your studies at this point, kind of neurons.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is a neuronal junction. This is a synapse. So, top to bottom would be the normal flow of neurotransmission. Like normally a neuron sends a nerve impulse, it shoots it down the axon, it gets to the synapse, and then at the synapse it releases neurotransmitters like serotonin or dopamine or GABA, whatever, shoots across the synapse, binds to receptors on the postsynaptic bouton, and then the signal is completed or can continue on to the next neuron, next synapse. And it's normally a one-way street, okay? It's normally a one-way street. But what happens with these endocannabinoids is that in response to serotonin or GABA or dopamine or whatever, it sends a message backwards. It's called retrograde neurotransmission. That postsynaptic neuron receives serotonin, which causes some intracellular event to say, hey, we got to turn some fats into anandamide now. And then anandamide gets released by the postsynaptic neuron and goes back to the first neuron, the presynaptic, binds to a receptor there, and actually can alter the magnitude of the other neurotransmitters. So endocannabinoids like anandamide, what they're doing, it's kind of like turning the volume down on other neurotransmitters. It says, hey, stop releasing now. It's going back and modulating the response of other neurotransmitters.
Miles, I have a question from chat.
Yeah.
Mr. Higgins asked, are there specific diseases that specifically target endocannabinoid receptors?
We're gonna go to talk about that.
Okay.
Yep, we're gonna get there. But now that we've introduced anandamide, actually, this is a good point to remind us. So remember that woman in Scotland that doesn't feel pain? Her anandamide levels are through the roof. She has too much. And basically, too much is being released. She's unable to break it down. She's basically a knockout model for this enzyme that degrades anandamide. So she has too much anandamide. She's unable to break it down. And so it's binding to those receptors all the time, and she doesn't feel pain. It's permanently altering her neurotransmission or the control of other neurotransmitters. So this is a little bit of a complicated graph over here, but I just wanted to show you how on the left-hand side, from the lipid membrane, anandamide and some of these other fatty acid modulators are released. They bind to receptors, specifically cannabinoid 1 and 2 receptors, but also some other receptors are involved. And then these are not hormones. This is my point to show you this. Hormones are released from a gland and spread out in the bloodstream all across the body. Endocannabinoids are released from one cell to the other. So they really are modulating the miniature cellular tissue milieu, not the whole body. But they respond to whole body changes. So in response to a stress event or an immune event, they'll help to coordinate the local population of cells to behave in a certain way by binding to cannabinoid 1 and cannabinoid 2 receptors. Have you studied G protein coupled receptors yet? Have you gotten to that point in your studies yet?
Nope.
Okay. So G protein coupled receptors are they're very important receptors that control a lot of destiny of the cell. And a lot of different neurotransmitter receptors are G protein coupled receptors. So all the serotonin receptors are G protein coupled receptors, dopamine receptors, but also receptors for other different types of hormones, so on and so forth. So I think about like 55% of all pharmaceutical drugs work on G protein coupled receptors. They're really quite involved. And so the CB1 and CB2 receptors are this class of receptor. As it shows over here, THC can bind to this receptor, gets you high. Anandamide is in such small levels that it doesn't get you high unless you're high on life like that woman in Scotland. Or, how about this? Any of you have felt a runner's high before? You've been dancing, you're feeling kind of good, you're exercising, right? Smacked my hand into the ceiling over here. That feeling of runner's high is actually associated with excess anandamide. That your body makes more anandamide, and that helps you feel kind of nice by binding to these receptors that are found, look, CB1 receptor, brain, adipose tissue, muscle, liver, GI tract, pancreas, CB2 receptor, immune cells. This is all over the place. So no wonder people are saying cannabis is a cure-all. Well, I'm not saying cannabis is a cure-all. That's not what I'm here for. But what I'm suggesting is that this system holds so much potential therapeutic value by nature of the fact that it's found in multiple different organs and tissue types, that therefore, if we can modulate it, that it holds therapeutic promise for a number of potential diseases associated with GI tract, brain, blah, 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 okay? So the endocannabinoid system is a homeostatic system. It helps to balance the functions of the body. It can also become allostatic. And what I mean by that is that if the system is constantly under stress or it's not being fed properly, it can become maladapted, that it can be, its function doesn't work quite as well. So what I mean by that is that if it becomes maladaptive and it's no longer able to help balance the function of your immune system or your stress response system, that if the endocannabinoids themselves, either the receptors or the ligands, they become deficient or too much, then this is where disease states might start to arise. So this might go back to one of the questions earlier. And this also goes back to the paper I wanted you all to read. Clinical endocannabinoid deficiency. That they're actually examining patients with diseases like migraines, fibromyalgia, irritable bowel syndrome, and multiple sclerosis as having some type of deficiency or maladaptation or dysfunction in the tone or the function of their endocannabinoid system. That their endocannabinoid system is not working properly, and that this might contribute to why migraines, fibromyalgia, and irritable bowel syndrome is occurring in these patients. And they actually took, yes.
Sorry for interrupting you.
No.
I know these are also diseases that have been, there's a lot of research going on into your internal microbiome and how it communicates. And these are diseases that they're looking at replenishing parts of your microbiome to treat a lot of these diseases right now.
Right.
Is there a relation to the endocannabinoid system with that? Do you know?
So remember, I have that photo of me posing with that scientist that a couple slides ago, Dr. Vincenzo DiMarzo. So that's his latest research, is he's trying to figure out what that relationship is. And I believe that there is a relationship, but this is so cutting edge. The question you asked is so cutting edge. That's what comes next. That's what we find out in the next year or two.
Okay, thank you.
So it's a really great question. Yes, 100%. But I believe the preclinical work I've seen so far is indicative of what you suggest, that there is a gut immune brain connection via the endocannabinoid system and the microbiome.
Do you, Maz, there's also a question from the crowd.
Yeah.
Mr. Blackburn asks, how exactly does the deficiency in the endocannabinoid system cause these diseases, or is that known?
So, of course, correlation does not equal causation, but I'll answer this by suggesting, so people with fibromyalgia, they have tonically low levels of anandamide, our bliss molecule, right? They actually, if you look at the cerebral spinal fluid levels of their anandamide, it's lower in fibromyalgia patients than compared to controls, or healthy people, I should say. So if they're deficient in that, and again, or think about it this way, in fibromyalgia, the neurons are overly sensitive. The pain response is too strong. Every little touch can cause pain to somebody. Remember when I described anandamide as a neurotransmitter that goes back to the neuron and says, hey, quiet, turn down the volume? So anandamide is helping control other transmitters. And that could involve the pain response too. Neurotransmitters involved with pain. So if there's not enough anandamide, somebody's deficient, then they're not going to have the chemical mechanism that says, stop overreacting neurons. Or some of these inflammatory disorders, multiple sclerosis, right? That might also be a deficiency. We need anandamide. I didn't talk about this as much, but anandamide is also involved in controlling inflammation in various cells as well, not just neurotransmission. Actually, there was a new paper that came out pretty recently that had shown that if you test hair follicles for anandamide, that it correlates to depression levels. So having too low amounts of anandamide, as showed up in a hair follicle test, might be a chemical marker for somebody that is depressed, because it's our bliss molecule. Doctors don't know about this. I gave a lecture to doctors at a Harvard pain clinic, and they were never taught about the endocannabinoid system in med school.
I was always under the impression not having hair was a sign of stress.
Well, you know, there could be something to that, right? I mean, why do people lose hair? It has to do with oxidative stress in the scalp. It has to do with a number of different functions, I suppose. Okay, so I'm going to keep moving on. I'm also cognizant of the fact that we're about 45 minutes into this. I do want to wrap it up soon. I don't want to waste your time too much longer, but I want to zoom in on this CBD molecule for a moment, because CBD is legal. THC not legal. CBD is legal. I mean, THC is legal in Massachusetts, but that's another story. CBD you can find at the Burlington Mall. Like there's a kiosk that sells shampoo with CBD or whatever, right? Like that's the point at where we're at. So what's going on? Why is this ingredient become viral? Why is it what's it doing in the body? Why does people say that it's going to be good for stress, pain, appetite, and mood? Because it balances the system that seems to be involved with stress, pain, appetite, and mood. Well, how does it do that? CBD does not directly activate the receptors. If it did directly activate the receptor, you would get high from it, and then it would be illegal. But instead, what CBD does is it blocks the enzyme that breaks down anandamide. CBD blocks the enzyme that breaks down our bliss molecule, which means that you get more bliss molecule. It can enhance the tone of your endocannabinoid signaling. So now, what did I just say? Endocannabinoids are involved with, if you're deficient, then likelihood for depression goes up. If you're deficient, likelihood of fibromyalgia goes up, migraines goes up, right? So that's why people are so interested in using CBD as a way of blocking the breakdown of anandamides so that we can get more of our endogenous cannabinoids.
Miles, how is this related to overreactive transmitters in epilepsy? You had mentioned epilepsy earlier.
I actually have a slide on epilepsy. So the interesting thing is that CBD works in a lot of different ways. This is just one biochemical mechanism by which it might work in our cells, and that a number of mechanisms, whether it's tuning down the excitatory neurotransmitters through this pathway, or through balancing the GABA pathway, or you know, even through modifying the metabolism of other anti-epileptic drugs, that's where CBD can have some promise as an anti-epileptic drug. But specifically, I wanted to bring this back to the stress response, right? We started this topic by talking about running away from tigers. You know, so again, the fight or flight response is involved with a number of different, you know, pathways. It starts in the central parts of the brain. So there's this hormone over here called corticotropin releasing hormone, CRH, and it's released by the hypothalamus onto the pituitary before, you know, cortisol is released and blah blah blah. So here we are deep in the reptilian part of the brain that responds to fear. And in response to fear and stress, the enzyme that breaks down anandamide, it's called Fa. I don't expect you to remember that. Fatty acid amide hydrolase, Fa. Fa goes up in stress, which causes anandamide levels to plummet. And anandamide levels plummeting causes anxiety to go up. So that's stress HPA axis. Anandamide levels get depleted because the enzyme goes kind of haywire, and that causes anxiety. So I got this graph over here from this article titled Integrating Endocannabinoid Signaling and Cannabinoids into the Treatment of PTSD, because that's a situation where stress response is out of balance. Look what the authors write. With respect to the fight or flight axis, that endocannabinoid signaling appears to be an important modulator of activation and termination of stress. Activation and termination of stress. Suppression of anandamide in the amygdala reptilian fear center of the brain correlate to the magnitude of stress. Low anandamide, more stress. Therefore, if you inhibit the breakdown of anandamide, that this can dampen the stress response. That's what it is. That's one of the reasons why CBD might be so popular, even as an over-the-counter supplement, is because if CBD, if one of its effects is to block Fa, and that causes anandamide levels to go up, then anxiety levels are going to go down, right? That's one of the ideas here. And then on top of that, and I didn't go into this as much, CBD can regulate some of the receptors that are found on the immune cells, and shutting down or modulating the ability for immune cells to release inflammatory markers can be really helpful for balancing inflammatory disease states.
Miles, I have another question for
Yes.
you.
Yes.
Does it mean you can cause a similar effect in a lady that to the lady that had no pain, that does not feel pain, by taking too much CBD? Take too much CBD.
It's, the thing is that CBD is actually, it's a somewhat mild inhibitor of FA. You could probably produce a more, so pharmaceutical companies like Pfizer have built some pretty powerful probes or enzymatic inhibitors of that enzyme that I would prefer to use for somebody if you want to mimic that woman's response. CBD is mild enough that it can block the enzyme somewhat, but without completely shutting it down. So I honestly think you'll get a little bit of, your liver will succumb from taking too much CBD before you get a complete abolishment of pain. But the people that use CBD as a daily supplement can modulate their pain levels, not completely get rid of it, but maybe if they're looking for an alternative to OTC, Advil or whatever, right? Low doses of CBD seem to have a good safety value, a good therapeutic window. Okay, so then this goes back to the question that you were asking earlier, is that CBD has been approved by the Food and Drug Administration for drug-resistant seizures as part of Dravet syndrome, which is a really rare and severe form of childhood epilepsy. So this was published in the New England Journal of Medicine, and they found that's actually very effective for supporting young children that are dealing with this really serious issue. And this is a 99% CBD preparation. It's very highly purified, high potency version of CBD. And that version of CBD that is used to treat epilepsy is really different from what my company produces. So we're starting to wrap up here. I want to talk a little bit about what CV Sciences, who I work for, does. The Farm Bill passed in December of 2018. And when the Farm Bill passed, it legalized hemp. It undid the Controlled Substances Act as it relates to agricultural hemp. So farmers can start to grow hemp in this country again. And that enables our company to sell hemp extracts that contain CBD as vitamin-like dietary supplements. So people can take this without a prescription for the management of their sleep, hygiene, pain response, daily stress levels. That's why you find CBD at the Burlington Mall now. That's why you find it at health food stores now. Nearby in Concord, right? Deborah's Natural Gourmet, they sell our brand of CBD, for example. We're not just producing CBD hemp extracts for the heck of it. We're actually conducting our own science on this, and we have recently published the first double-blind placebo-controlled trial on a hemp extract in the scientific literature. And we actually found that people taking one of our formulas compared to placebo had improved sleep, improved pleasure from life, and actually decreased appetite. It helped them with their metabolism a little bit. So I just want to talk a little bit about what I do. I am national educator for CV Sciences. I'm involved with giving lectures like this. If it weren't for COVID, I would be traveling right now. I would be talking at conferences to doctors and pharmacists and scientists about this stuff. I would be even visiting health food stores and giving lectures to the public that are curious. Check out CV Sciences TV on YouTube, where there's a whole running series called Minute with Miles, where if you liked this kind of content, you can go back and watch stuff where I kind of explain little bite-sized vignettes about how CBD might impact the stress response, so on and so forth. I'm involved with writing, and lately I've gotten involved with product formulation. So this is a little bit like baby pharma, where you actually, I've been involved with trying to figure out what supplements or what other botanicals or nutrients would pair really well with CBD from a nutritional biochemical standpoint as a new product that our company could produce. But I want to rewind a little bit. Yeah,
Miles,
sorry.
one quick question. Sorry for interrupting you. Is there another question from the audience? Is there a potential for one to become either psychologically or physically dependent on CBD?
So THC does have a lot of physical dependence. Okay, I know there's some argument about that in the cannabis community, but cannabis use disorder is real with THC. That being said, get this. I love this. The World Health Organization clearly stated that CBD has zero abuse potential. You do not get addicted to CBD. And one of the things that my company is doing, CV Sciences, is that we were just awarded a patent on, oh, it looks like my camera went out. I apologize that my camera just went out, but the show must go on. Our company was just awarded a patent on a pharmaceutical drug that combines CBD with nicotine, because we think that that combination would be really great for people that are looking for smokeless tobacco addiction relief. So yes, CBD is not only non-addictive, it appears to be anti-addictive. Okay. You can still hear me. I know my camera's out, but you can still hear me, yeah?
We can still hear you.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to go back and honor kind of my path that took me here, kind of relate it back to you all. Again, I had a really great time at Minuteman. I'm super grateful for what happened at Minuteman. It's actually some of the work that I had done while I was a student at Minuteman. I've always been interested in how it is that our cells respond to external stimuli, whether that is herbs, botanicals, whether it's potential food ingredients or toxins. I published, in my science fair presentation at Minuteman was on the potential for toxicity in neurons with caffeine and aspartame, as is found in Diet Coke. So I still have this poster presentation that I delivered at Minuteman. And that's sort of, I guess what I'm trying to say here is what you're learning in shop is so invaluable and gives you such a leg up on just understanding biology and chemistry and biotechnology in a way that most people don't get, and really is going to set you up for doing so well in college, should you choose to go down that route. If you want to go to grad school and become a scientist, like, you're going to know stuff that other people are just going to be starting to learn. In grad school, I went to McGill University in Montreal. On the left hand is a photo of how messy the lab bench was. Those are all Western blots we're working on. And I published this article over here that was, we basically discovered a new way in which lung antioxidants are produced in lung fibroblasts in order to protect themselves from cigarette smoke exposure. And we discovered this new pathway, and it's been cited a bunch of times. So that was a really cool article. I was going to go for my PhD. Things happen. I'm really grateful to be where I'm at right now at CV Sciences, and CV Sciences appreciates what I do so much that, well, who knows what goes down further down the road too. It is 58 minutes on my side of things. I was going to talk a little bit about some of the methodology of this paper, just because that's kind of cool from a biotech lab standpoint, but I also don't want to keep you too long. So if anybody has any curiosity about some of the science I've done, I'd be happy to answer. But we can also just end it here. And my invitation for you is email me, call me. If you have any questions about your projects, I would love to be a resource for you. It's really fun for me to talk science. I enjoy encouraging young people and coaching them with what they're doing. I guess I still think of myself a little bit as a young person. I just turned 30 years old, whatever. But yeah, definitely. I would love to be involved with whatever you're doing. So let me know how I can do that. And thank you so much for listening in to this lecture today too.